I'm Sejong with Plan 1.5 and counsel for the Korean youth climate litigation, which closed quite recently. So I'm very happy to be joined by lawyers who actually brought ruling of unconstitutionality with Jean there. So 5 years in 20 slides is the title of my Pechakucha. This is my first time trying this, so I'll try to make it fun. So it all starts with our youth plaintiffs. They started in 2018. They were one of the earliest organizations that had an organization that's dedicated to climate change. And that really made a difference in environmental movement in Korea, because at the time, people were more concerned about air pollution, and carbon dioxide was kind of number two, which I don't think is right. So they started marching on the streets. This says, irresponsibility award given to the government. So they really brought the public awareness in climate change. And one of the things they wanted to do from the very beginning was to sue the government. It's not just about demonstrations. They wanted to claim their rights to a safe climate, and that was their key issue. And they went around looking for lawyers who would represent them. But every single time they said, oh, it's a great idea as an idea, but you'll fail. It'll never pass the doorstep of the court because it's too difficult. And when they came to us, I had just began my new career as an activist in the civil society. Before that, I was doing private practice. And when they came to us, because we were lawyers who, tell everybody that we're going to work on climate change. If we say no to this case, that would not make sense. So it was an offer that we couldn't refuse. It was legally almost impossible because there were no precedent. It was even before the Dutch court Supreme case came out. So there was zero precedent anywhere in the world. But logically and normatively, it's 100% right. So that's why we started to take the case, and we started discussion in the August of 2019. And comes to 2020 March, we filed the first constitutional complaint on climate change, arguing the national climate target is insufficient, it's too weak. The climate change, the degree of harm and impact will infringe and violate our fundamental rights, including right to environment, right to life, right to health, right to equality, right to property, basically every fundamental right we can think of. So that was me. That was the first press conference that I have ever had in my entire life, I think. See me very nervous, looking slightly younger than now. And from there on, for 3 years, it was this, the life of lawyers you all know. So that's the whole submission that we wrote in the 3 years. That's the submission that we wrote. And of course, the evidences were much larger. You wouldn't be able to print it. And during this time, the real difficulty wasn't trying to find the right facts. It was the data was too large. IPCC report is about like 5,000 pages per volume. And there's WMO, all these acronyms, IEA, Energy Agency. They all produce so much reports and papers that we cannot read them all, but we have to fish them through and find the right facts that are helpful and that are not disputable. So trying to build our case, trying to find the right evidence, all of that took a lot of time. And I actually loved it because, I mistakenly put my keyword as nerd power. Everybody else, they said human rights, immigration. I didn't know it was my area of interest. I thought it was description of myself as nerd power. The superpower I have is I can sit on a chair and not move. I can read and I can enjoy that. I think that's one of the rare good qualities that I have. And I wanted to make the best use of it. And probably this was one of the best ways I could make a good use of myself. So that was 3 years. So every time there's a new decision in Germany, in Ireland, and in Belgium, we would translate and submit it to court and saying, well, look at that. They're making a right decision. So can you. You can be courageous, join your friends, trying to encourage the court to make that difficult but courageous decision. Every time there's a new report, every time there's flood, unforeseen climate impacts in South Korea that people can relate to, they see on the news, we would just emphasize that and tell the court. Because, Climate activists, we look at the news and we pick the climate-related news. So we think, oh, it's all over the news, but my father wouldn't know about it. My brother even wouldn't know about it. It's only a small part of the news. So we want to amplify that and make sure the justices, the court judges, are familiar with the relevant facts of the case. But to be honest, it really felt like writing a love letter on my own, folding it into a paper plane, and just throwing it into this dark tunnel, because there was no response. The constitutional litigation in Korea is not adversarial. There is no defendant. The plaintiffs will go to the court and complain, and the court will review and make a decision. The government and the National Assembly were only interested parties. They are entitled to submit their opinion, but they're not obligated to do so. So the entire process from 2020 to 2023, the government only submitted one very short response, saying there's no standing. It's too far away. We are not sure whether those alleged harms will actually happen. They live in apartments. They will not be flooded, So it was very formalistic response. So it was not going back and forth like what we experience in usual litigation. It was one-sided love letter. At one point, you start feeling like you're a stalker, So, but we cannot stop. We couldn't stop because we don't know when the decision will be made. We have to do our best to argue our case. So this was the third anniversary of our one-sided argument litigation. So by the third anniversary, we try to invite lawyers from outside the country, inside the country, law professors to sign on a petition that this is actually an important case, and the court should not delay the review of the case, urging the court to come up with a decision. And also, actually the most important part of all of that, our youth plaintiffs really did a wonderful job going around thinking about new ways to campaign, to meet people on the street, go to National Assembly, demonstrate, get petitions from politicians, trying to maintain the public awareness and attention to the case. So that was a big chunk of our job, because it was not just the litigation, the whole thing was actually a campaign that was supposed to raise awareness on this issue, regardless of whether we win or not by the end of the day. And we also did like a public screening. There was a movie, a documentary called Duty of Care. It was a movie about the Dutch court case, the Netherlands climate litigation. And when it came out, I got this email on this listserv that this movie came out. And so I wrote to the director and send me a copy so I can make a subtitle. So 3 days, it was a long holiday, the Children's Day of 2023. So 3 days I made subtitles, made all the translations. On June, we had a public screening of this movie, inviting citizens to talk about the case. And of course, we had we called it GV. I don't know even what that stands for. After that, it will be the movie stars and the directors in a regular movie, but it was the plaintiffs and us talking about our case and having questions. So it was fun, but very meaningful experience for us too. And 2024, in January, we got a notice from the court that there will be a hearing. So all that, so it was the game. It was the last stage of the case. About 4,000 or 5,000 cases come to constitutional court every year, and only about 10 gets a public hearing. So it's very exceptional. That means the court is really serious about the case, and that means there's a slightly higher chance of winning too. But there's no guarantee. Gene would know. So from January, we already had 4 cases: our youth case, citizen case, baby case, and another citizen case. So all the legal representatives, the counsels of all these 4 cases came together, formed one team, and we started preparing for the public hearing. And we fought a lot because everybody's very passionate, and most of them have more than like 10, 20 years more experience than I have actually as a litigator. But on climate change, we're the nerds. So we know a lot about climate science. They know more about law and the legal strategy. So there were overlapping strategies, of course, but different opinions. So a lot of debate, discussions, but by the end of the day, that was essential because, we don't know what the justices think. What we debate within ourselves was like a simulation of what could happen in the court. And by that process, we were able to kind of filter out what's going to work and what's not going to work, bearing ourselves on the right balanced position. So from January to the public hearing in April and May, we met basically every week talking about our case. We wrote a lot of summary memos. So that was all the preparation time. And I basically spent most of 2024 preparing the case. And by that time, the biggest challenge for me personally was the pressure, because our plaintiffs had been working so hard for such a long time. It really felt like the guy doing the penalty kick. Penalty kick, people don't expect you to miss. People expect you to score. But the kicker himself will be like, oh my God, what if I miss? So I know public hearings are, you get a lot of attention, but is that the most critical part of litigation? Probably not, because we've been submitting dozens of written submissions already. Our logic, our argument, our evidence is already there. So what you present in the public hearing, the Q&As, can be helpful, but it's not going to be critical. But it does feel critical. So there was a lot of pressure. I was under a lot of stress because I was thinking about the plaintiffs. They worked so hard, I cannot betray them. So these were my personal solutions. I'm not a man of social network, but I started Instagram. I started cataloging plants. So these are all plants that were growing around our office. I would just walk around, take a picture of this plant, find it on the internet. Oh, the name of this plant is this. So I've been cataloging these little weeds that grow around my neighborhood for months to relieve the stress. Did a lot of running and cycling on the river. And of course, my biggest distraction of life. She's been keeping me very busy. So it was also a good balance, You're thinking about work all the time, but when you come home, you physically cannot because there's very loud noise. So I'm very happy by the end of the day, when the hearings were happening, I managed not to crack under pressure, and we did the hearing. So we had expert witnesses on climate science, expert witness on international law, and we had Q&As, and 2 hearings went on. And of course, our plaintiff groups also prepared various forms of campaigns, handwritten letters that will be hung around the court's walls. We had press conferences and a lot of media events. And on August 2024, finally, that was the day of the decision. We were super nervous, but they finally said it was unconstitutional, so it was great. But maybe that's the bigger lesson of this case, was that was not actually the end. We thought, if we win this case, the world will change. But objectively, as a lawyer, I should have known that winning a litigation doesn't change the world. It just gives you an opportunity to start changing, right? So it was a partial victory. The law was unconstitutional, but the court dismissed the overall target. So this is the press conference we had right after the decision. Half of them were crying, not because of joy, but of disappointment. But after a couple of months, when we started to digesting, it really occurred to us that this should not be the final answer. This is the beginning of the answer that we were looking for. And what we achieve through campaigns and movements is like, we're not trying to break the rock or crack the wall by throwing eggs on it. This is a Korean saying. You're trying to break the rock by throwing eggs, but what we're trying to do is mark where the weakest point of the wall is, right? So when the real force comes in, strike there, because this part is pretty hard. But if we strike this, we can bring that change. And very small number of people in the civil society, the activists, are actually paving the way for a bigger change and effectively accelerating the change by introducing how to do that. And maybe we need to crash the camel, and this decision was also another strand of hay on a haystack. And well, it's over time, but this does not stop here, because now we have case in Japan in August. They're suing the power companies. Case in Taiwan, they went to the Taiwanese Constitutional Court. So just as the European victories were so helpful to ours, we're really hoping that ours would be the same to our friends in Taiwan and Japan and beyond. Thank you.